Hi, friends. Welcome back to the Multifamily Leaders Podcast, brought to you by J. Turner Research. Our bi-weekly discussion with industry experts brings you the latest insights you need to stay competitive among your renters and associates. I am your host, Marcus Armstrong. Come with me as we listen and talk to industry experts that give us the best insights we need. You may have seen many of our social media posts in the past. You will know that I star in many of these. But what you may not know is that there's actually an even bigger star behind the camera. That bigger star is none other than Angeline Pham. Angeline, thank you for joining.
Hi, Marcus. Glad to be on this podcast. You know, it's a little odd to be on the front of the camera for once, but happy to be here.
I got to ask you, Angeline, are you nervous to be here today?
A little. I am, as I said, more used to being behind the camera, directing people, giving people lines, making people lip sync. But here I am in front of the camera for once, and hope I do well.
I think you're going to do perfectly fine. I do just want to say thank you for making me always look cool, and thank you for always making Peyton look silly.
That's what I'm here for. I find the best talent in the company, and I put them in the spotlight and let them shine the way they do most.
I want that to be on record, best in the company, spotlighted, right here.
There you go.
Angeline, you're kind of what I would call a social media savant. How do you feel about that?
Well, that's a really big and honorable title, but I feel like I do have the advantage of growing up in social media. So I feel like a lot of things I learned before coming into the company were things I picked up from just being an early adapter and that being a part of my childhood. And being able to integrate that into the work I do is just a lot of fun, honestly. I have a lot of fun with it. So thank you.
I think it's really interesting. Several times people will come down the office and see us filming, and I think they have to stop and wonder, do you guys ever even work around here?
Yep, that's a lot of the comments we see on our posts. It seems like they're like, y'all have a lot of fun. And so that's just exactly what I want to convey.
I do want to point out, though, that doing 37 takes of the exact same movement back to back to back to back to back is actually not a lot of fun. It's kind of tedious.
Yeah, and I bet you can attest to this too. We did a series called Love at First Lease, where you played 5 characters. You played the host, all the contestants, and you did all the, behind the scenes cuts that they do on like The Bachelorette or those shows like that. And yeah, you were a trooper through that.
You know what? That was definitely the most challenging role that I've had up to this point, but I am looking forward to what we have coming next. But Angeline, the reason we wanted to have you on today is to help give some perspective and guidance to our friends in the multifamily world on social media. So please, what do you have for us today?
Yeah, so I mentioned earlier that a lot of young people grow up with social media, and a thing that we're seeing now is that, and this was actually published by Forbes, they did a study that 40% of the youth, and this means Gen Z, use TikTok, Instagram, and other platforms as a search engine. So what does this mean? This means we're used to Googling, going on Google, searching up events near me or fun things to do near me. But a common thing now is to get video content of these things. So there are accounts dedicated to, creating content about, things that are going on in, let's say, the city you're living in. So for example, what I like to do personally is go on TikTok and say, fun things to do in Houston this weekend. And there will be a slew of video content that will pop out for me to check out. And so video content on social media is a great way for people now to find out things to do.
I want to backtrack that stat you gave us from Forbes a second ago. You said 40% of the youth are using TikTok and Instagram as search engines, which is incredible. And I've seen it with my wife, who's not a Generation Z person. She's a millennial like me, but she will open Pinterest and use it as a search engine to find things, like you're saying, to do in Houston. Or if I ask her to search something, like the first place she goes is Pinterest. And me, I don't have social media, so like these things aren't known to me. That feels otherworldly almost. Why do you think that's happening? Why are we using social media as a search platform now?
I feel like we are getting to an age where visual content is more engaging. And I use visual as an umbrella term because that not only includes, images, that includes video too. We want things that are fast paced, and we want things that are easily digestible within 30 seconds to a minute. And so instead of somebody, reading through a blog with, I don't know, like 500 words of, 5 things to do in Houston, they can just, scroll through or watch a video of these things being told to them verbally. So the way we digest content is evolving now. And so that's what social media really adapts itself for, this quick, fast, digestible content.
A picture is worth 1,000 words is what I'm hearing.
Exactly. That's where the phrase comes in, right?
Okay, well, you're talking a lot about this video type content. Let me ask you a question. What have been some of your favorite types of content?
Humor is always great. I feel like the way Gen Z talks sometimes is a bit alien to most people, and I can attest to this. Sometimes I'll say phrases in the office and people will just kind of look at me like, what are you saying? But like a lot of Gen Z humor comes through this sort of video content, and I don't know, like just humorous videos, like just when people do like POV style videos, those are always fun. Or like, I guess videos that I find relatable to me. There's a lot of content creators I follow who are around my age, starting their first corporate job, and they're making videos navigating, the structure of the way they work and like how they're making relationships in the workplace. So things like that. Yeah.
I think that's fantastic. And speaking of the way Generation Z speaks, you and I have almost morning conversations where we run through several bits of lingo that I've heard, from some of my younger cousins and things like that. So thank you for always keeping me up to date on the slang that's being used. But there is one video series, and again, I'm not really big into social media myself, but one video series on TikTok that I do actually really enjoy, and it's the how much do you pay for your rent videos, where the guys around New York City. And what I think is really fascinating is I live in Houston, and I think we could all probably agree that the housing market in Houston versus New York is entirely different. So being able to see like what people have to pay to get the house that they have up in New York is really fascinating to me. What do you think makes that style of video so effective, and how can apartment communities tap into some of that same curiosity?
I personally really enjoy those videos, even though I have no plans to move to New York or Chicago anytime soon. I find them fascinating because you're getting a glimpse into the life of some random stranger. You get to see like their style. You get to see, obviously, the amenities of the apartment too. It's a really great subtle way for apartment locators or apartment management companies to showcase their apartment in a not outwardly salesy way. And I think it's a really clever way to show off, your location or what's surrounding the area. If you're not familiar with the premise, there's a lot of accounts that do this, but it's usually one person goes up to a stranger. Usually it's not a stranger. They've prearranged this, but it's meant to feel organic. And that's the whole point of it, to feel organic. It's like, oh, I bumped into a stranger on the street and they were nice enough to show their home to me. And so they'll have like a little tour. They'll be like, oh, this is where I sleep. And oh, I got this off of Facebook Marketplace and I thrifted it and it like looks so great in my home now. But yeah, it's meant to feel organic and convey a sense of, I guess, authenticity that's not very forced, right?
Oh, wait, hold on here. You're telling me that these videos aren't real?
I know. They're not most of the time. I hope not. I hope you're not inviting strangers to your place who you just meet on the street. But yeah, what I'm trying to emphasize here, it feels organic and it's a way to connect with somebody. And I feel like this can definitely be integrated into the content that we do in the multifamily industry. I know we're trying to adopt social media and adopt these trends, but I think when it comes to making videos, conveying authenticity is very important. So what that can mean is like, maybe you're not doing tours of your residents' apartments, but you maybe want to showcase who's behind all the work that that goes on in the apartment, right? Do like a day in the life of like a maintenance person, right? Do a day in the life of like a leasing agent. So putting people in front of the camera is a great way to show off your brand and who's behind the brand.
I absolutely love that. That's actually why I wanted to put you in front of the camera, because you have been behind several, or actually all of our videos, quite honestly. You know what? We've talked a lot about TikTok. Okay. I wanna branch out because there's other social media platforms. There's things like Instagram that you mentioned earlier in the episode so far, and Facebook, which some people view as a dying platform. I guess let me ask you this: for someone specific in the multifamily industry, right? Which platforms would you recommend them to focus on?
Well, the first thing to do is kind of just not overwhelm ourselves with so many platforms. And to pick one, I would say Instagram, because TikTok to some people is very daunting because you have to constantly churn out content and video content too. So it's a lot of work to constantly make those videos and keep up with trends, with audios, with algorithms. And for somebody who's jumping on this for the first time, social media, like let's say you're a property manager and you want to make a social media page for your apartment community. TikTok is very overwhelming, especially if you haven't gotten used to it yet. So Instagram is a great blend of doing photo content and video content as well. And you can alternate between the two. But yes, I'd say Instagram is a great starter.
Angeline, you have a really interesting, content rule whenever you're posting to our socials. I was curious, could you help break that down for the listeners?
Sure. So when it comes to content, it's great to put yourself in the shoes of the person viewing the content, right? A rule of thumb is you want to diversify your content. It's very repetitive if, as an audience member, you're seeing the same type of content posted on a page that you're following. And by that, for example, I mean if you solely post things about the apartment amenities and like, oh, we have a new unit open. Like, oh, we have, XYZ, right? Amenity. A great way to diversify your content is to follow the 50-30-20 rule. So the 50 is the engagement portion. So this is when you're posting content that shows your brand's personality. So for example, like I mentioned previously, day in the life of a staff member. So that can be a leasing agent, that could be a property manager, that can be a maintenance staff member as well. So it basically walks them through what their 9 to 5, 9 to 2 is like, and it shows, again, the people behind the brand. And that's very important when it comes to relating to people, right? And another one, the next category is informational. So that's the 30%. So this is when you're determining the type of information that your audience wants to know. Marcus knows this, but in the past couple of winters at Houston, we've been having pretty bad freezes. So a way to do content about that is, how do you prepare for the winter freeze? You can make content about how to prepare beforehand and what to do during. So things that you think would enrich your audience's knowledge. And the last pillar is promotion. So it sounds pretty self-explanatory. How do you promote your property? For example, doing a tour of an apartment, giving the price. And this is kind of like the salesy part of marketing, right? Because marketing is very typically associated with sales. But the thing with social media is you don't want to use it solely as a tool for selling if you're doing like business to consumer, right? Because as a consumer, I feel like most people know when they're being sold to, and if that's conveyed all the time on your social media page, that's not like the content everybody wants to see all the time.
I'm sure listeners in the Northeast or even just up north, and even our coworker Scott, are probably laughing at our ideas of winter storms in Texas being so terrible. I promise, folks, the Texas infrastructure is not built for the type of ice and snow that we've been getting. Anyway, I think it's really interesting. You're talking a lot about being organic in your social media content, and I think you're absolutely right. Whenever I view like a social media from like a company, for example, what I notice a lot of times is it does feel very salesy, and like I can almost immediately tell that I'm being sold to. And I think I use Reddit a lot. And if you're like me and you go down Reddit rabbit holes, you'll find that what looks like a post or whatever is actually just like an ad,
Sponsored.
yeah, sponsored ad. And I immediately, like, without even reading sponsored, I can just like read the post or whatever, because that's where my eyes go to first. And I'm like, oh yeah, okay, this is an ad. I know what's going on here. But I think there's something even worse that some companies do. And I think it's falling behind in trends. So again, I mentioned I'm on Reddit, so I like to think of myself as being pretty up to date on internet meme culture. And I see sometimes big brands will try to use the same meme formats that were popular maybe 8 months ago, maybe even a year ago. So they're a little far behind. And I guess I'm curious about finding the balance between staying on top of new trends and creating original content. What advice would you give to someone who's worried about seeming inauthentic or conversely falling behind in trends?
I think that's a great question, because as someone who is behind all the social media stuff, I struggle with this sometimes too. I try to, like I was saying earlier, diversify my content. But also an important thing with trends is that you don't want to rely solely on trends to connect to your audience, right? Because I feel like from a content creation point of view, you're going to get very burnt out very fast. You're like, oh, I have to keep up with the XYZ trend. I have to record this. I have to ask somebody to record this. This is something I go through a lot on our page. There's always that meme of like, oh, when the social media girl comes in with the camera and everybody's hiding away. That's me. I'm social media girl. But creating original content shows creativity. And I feel like keeping up with trends is a great way to connect to that. Like, oh, I recognize this audio. They're going to do this trend in this way. It's a very fast way to like connect with your audience, but being able to create original content shows that you put more thought into it. And of course that comes with a lot more, you have to have more time to do that, and you have to have more, resources to do that sometimes. But original content seems like you put more effort into it. But yeah, like having a good balance between the type of content you put out, like I was saying earlier, the 50-30-20 rule can kind of help you have those guidelines.
You just said something really interesting about resources, having the right resources. For someone starting out with social media at their community, what are some of the non-negotiable tools or resources that they need?
It's so easy to create content these days. You just got to have a phone, right? You don't need to have these fancy setups.
I promise you that's exactly what it is. Angeline will come into the office with her phone and be like, are you ready to record?
I'm just like, I already have it set up. I'm like, hey guys, this is what the thing is. And then Peyton and Marcus are like, all right, it's time to record. But yeah, a phone. And I guess for tools, the tools I kind of use are like tools for inspiration. So like I go on Pinterest sometimes. I'm like, oh, what looks great visually, right? And I also use social media as a tool. Like a tip I have is that if you see a trend or like a trending audio that you'd like to use that you think fits with the content you want to put out, it's good to save it into a folder, right? Because I do this thing where I will like it and I'll be like, oh, like I've made a history of that, and I will remember to go back to it, but then I forget. I'm like, I have to scroll. I'm like, oh god, it's like all the way at the bottom. But in terms of measuring your impact, because I know that's something important too, and there's a tool for that. For Instagram, for example, I recommend going to like the performance tab, especially if your Instagram profile is set as a business profile. You can see how your posts have been performing, who's been engaging with it, what are the demographics like. It's a really great breakdown. But if you are wanting to get more advanced in your like video editing, this is still sort of beginner, but CapCut is a great tool too, because you can all do the editing on your phone. You can also edit it on desktop as well, but that's a great way to stitch together videos, and that's what I do whenever I stitch together like the little short videos we do on our page.
It's really funny to walk into Angeline's office and just see her twiddling away on her phone. It's like, are you even working? Like, what are you doing here?
Yep, and then you hear the same audio play over and over again because I'm recording. I'm like, I have to cut that 1 second, and I'm trying to get it.
So let's get a little bit more hard hitting here, Angeline. What are some common mistakes you see apartment communities making on social media right now, and how can they course correct?
Yeah, I think a common thing I see is, like I was mentioning a little bit earlier, only posting about one thing, right? So just posting pictures of like, oh, this is like a new unit we have open, and that's it, and then price, right? Yes, I'm informed of what unit you have open, but if that's the only content I see, then like what else is there? And like only posting one format of content too, like solely photos and nothing else. Doesn't really show the personality behind it. Or some people will try a little bit harder, but kind of like in the wrong direction, like solely like posting generic Canva templates. And yes, I also use Canva. I think it's a wonderful tool, but not personalizing it and just maybe like changing out the default text to something is kind of, I mean, you're trying harder to make it visually nice, but then it looks kind of all over the place now. And even though, yes, it looks nice, it doesn't show me any personality, right? And what I see great examples of, to go on the positive side, is this is very common in particularly student housing communities. They do a lot of like fun content of like, especially like video content of, talking about who's behind the camera, right? Who's running the show at these communities. So you'll have like young people in front of the camera doing like little tours and stuff like that. So I think their content is really engaging. I can't remember names from the top of my head, but I would shout them out. Y'all are doing a great job.
But what I'm hearing is if you really want to stick to it, the 50-30-20 rule seems to be what we're after, right? You have a lot of people using Canva templates or just putting out really nice informational thing, but there's no engagement to it, right? There's not any idea that Danielle, the property manager, is back there and has this kind of personality. There's no personalized touch to it. So I think I agree with you, something that I'm noticing within the industry too. Lots of great information out there on the social media channels, but not enough engagement type posts. And then what I would say conversely on the student side is, you're right, there is a lot of engagement type content being created, but maybe not always the relevant informational type content also being put out there. So I think, again, just kind of going back to it, abiding by that 50-30-20 rule that you laid out seems to be maybe like the happy balance between the two here. All right, Angeline, looking ahead, what are some emerging social media trends that you're excited about and that you think the multifamily industry should be paying attention to?
Ooh, social media trends. It's so funny because it's so hard to predict what will be trending today. Sometimes some random audio bite will like be the new thing, and so it's kind of hard to pinpoint trends specifically, as in like trending audios and trending style of video. I'm specifically talking about video, but I think, I'm really excited. I'm going to go back to what I said about the videos I like to see, like 20-year-olds starting their new corporate job. And I'm really excited to see young people take charge of the social media behind brands, right? Because like I said, a lot of us grew up with social media as kind of like a native language. We're familiar with the territory. We like content that relates to us, right? Young people like to use social media as like a way to seem relatable, right? And I feel like a lot of brands could use that, right? I feel like we're sometimes a little bit too rigid, and though there's nothing wrong with being serious, it's always great to show a bit of personality, a bit of humor, in my opinion, depending on, I guess, the culture. I'm really excited to see these bigger companies take up social media as like a form to relate to other people. And I think that's something the multifamily industry is growing into as well.
So it's really funny you talk about that, because you see articles in like the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, or the Economist, where they're talking about different subsections of TikTok, like book talk, or there's business talk. I think it's really interesting. I can't wait for prop talk.
Prop talk. We gotta make that a thing then, I guess.
All right, Angeline. Well, I tell you what, thank you so much for joining me today. I know this was a little bit of a nerve-wracking experience for you, but you did wonderful. And so thank you for listening to the Multifamily Leaders Podcast. Be sure to subscribe on Spotify and Apple Podcasts so you don't miss another exciting episode. If you have any questions, please email us at podcast@jturnerresearch.com. Always happy to read the comments that come in from there. If you want to learn more about Angeline's process with social media, we have taken all of her knowledge out of her brain and put it into a lovely presentation that we are more than happy to walk through with you. So please let us know if you would like to have any of that. Angeline, final thoughts.
Thanks for having me on. Yes, it was a little nerve-wracking, but I get to yap, as they say. It's me, I'm they. As I say about social media, which is pretty much what I do on a daily basis, among other things.
Perfect. Thanks so much.
Bye.